Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders topic of the week. Steve, we covered this a couple weeks ago, but the huge news in 2023 and even at the end of 2022 was, the massive layoffs and budget cuts that are happening as we're working with a lot of client companies. One of the things we're talking with them about is how do they handle discovery? What do they need to do? Do they need to reset their strategy? And with a wave of budget cut happening at a lot of companies, even if they're not cutting people, and a lot of companies doing a reduction in force, we thought it might be a good time to talk about how do we keep product management on course when dealing with cuts. And, as our resident historian, we've been through the .com bust, the financial bust. Talk to me about, in general, what you've seen happen.
Well, I think the thing I see most often is a realization that occurs 3 to 6 months after the cuts of what all these people did. I remember, I'll do that one. I remember leaving a job and they said, well, you know what, pack your stuff and go, and then 2 days later, they called me and said, oh, they just figured out what you do. Can you come back in and do turnover to somebody? And the person who called me was the HR person who said, but if you've already started your new job, wink, wink, you don't have to come back. So have you already started your new job? And I said, yes, I have. And she's like, then you don't have to come back. But it's this sudden realization that, these people were needed. It wasn't all this, it wasn't that we had a whole bunch of people sitting around waiting for work. And I think that's really the big impact of these massive changes, including, one company we know, they just deleted the entire product management department. And sure enough, in a few months, everybody's going to go, oh, you mean prioritizing features was something product management did, or reading aloud to salespeople from SharePoint was something product management did. So,
and for me,
and it occurs over and over again.
It does, and I go back, and I've brought this former employer GE up, but I remember the first time out of grad school, I went through it, and it's like, it seems like they're given a number often if they're doing a RIF, and they really don't do any thinking about who and what skills they need to get rid of. They create some generic they do LIFO, right?
Everybody needs to give up 10%.
Yeah, and there's no strategy to it, and it's not a product management specific thing, though. We're going to get to it later. I think that I think product management sometimes bears more of the brunt than other places, and maybe marketing as well. But what we did on Monday, we put this question in the community. How do you keep product management on course with when dealing with downsizing and budget cuts? Obviously, I had to shorten that a little to even get on the title slide of the last one. And May Wong, I think, May, this is the first time you were ever the first answer. No? Second time? Okay. May, you came in with a really good take that you can't do it in the near term, right? You've just changed the entire dynamic and people are fearful. You've lost your trust. Talk to me more about what you're thinking.
So when you lose a certain percentage of people around you, even if it's like 1 or 2 people on your team, you're thinking through a lot of like, well, why them and why not me, or why them, or what are the chances it could be me, or when's the next one, am I next, right? Those are the things that I know I went through every time I saw layoffs. And then you spend the next 2 weeks to 4 weeks gossiping about what might be next, right? How stable is the company, i.e. when's the next one? Is this, and there are companies where, you just know it's an annual thing because they decide that they have to chop 10% every year because some guy decided it was a great idea. And so like just thinking through all that, like you can't, like, a lot of my work is about team building, culture building. But how do you do that when everyone's fearful and everyone's thinking about it? Sure, there's going to be like a couple of people who work extra hard to make sure they're not on the next list. But then also anyone who's competent is like, well, I don't want to work in this misery. So it's not even just the layoffs, it's the aftermath of the layoffs where people leave. And the slow trickle maintains that poor morale.
And especially in companies, and I've been there when it happens, where they don't rip the whole Band-Aid off at once. They do a smaller riff, and then 3 months later they do another riff, and then it's like it becomes the serial thing where everybody, the doubt is there. It goes back to our conversation on toxic companies a few weeks ago. But I completely agree. I actually, you talk about the good people. My first job out of grad school, there was a guy who knew the annual riff was coming, went through a whole process, got hired, did not give his notice because he knew the exact week was going to happen. And he volunteered to his boss to be one of the people to get riffed. So he got a 3-month severance and started a job the next week. I mean, if it gets that predictable, right? It's
good for him.
Yeah, he played it to his advantage. And I learned a lot of lessons from him right there, right? It's like you always have to be looking out for yourself. With where we're going, but it's tough. It's the gossiping. It's the, I know some people don't like the word quiet quitting, but this is what leads to that, right? When people aren't certain what's happening, I would say that in my experience, maybe 10% of the people put their head down and say, I'm going to work harder and harder and harder to make sure I'm not the next one. But 90% of the people start worrying for their job, start looking for another job, start checking out. Because they realize there's nothing they can do about it. So May, thank you so much for that insight. Jason Weber came in after you. He talked about a lot of it is just listening to your team's concerns as a product leader, making sure you're there to listen to them, to be there, let them know what you know, be transparent where we want to go. Lee, you came in next and you talked about, you said adding to May and Jason. I want to think that reiterating the company's goals and pairing them with known customer pain points is a way to do it. Talk to me about that approach.
Yeah, going through rounds of layoffs too, it's like you have less resources. Everyone's fighting over them now. You don't know what is the priority anymore because, like you said, so many of these layoffs happen with no strategy and no thought put into it at all. So products left cleaning up the mess, trying to right the ship. And so I think really trying to understand still, like, obviously revenue is probably a big deal. So what are the short-term wins you can get to get revenue and how to tie that into the existing pain points exist? It's, again, putting a lot on product. I mean, in regards to product strategy, I feel like that's the best way. But to May's point, you deal with a bunch of people who are like checking out or looking for new jobs. And also a lot of the time, especially if you're in a bigger company and you're not used to working like a scrappy startup, you're kind of thrown into that environment when you're not used to it, and people sink or swim. It's like suddenly you have to do marketing. Suddenly you have to be on sales demos, and maybe you're not used to that. And that's really difficult. So getting your team to wear multiple hats when they're maybe not used to it is a different challenge. Also, you need
completely and totally different culturally, completely and totally differently. Awesome. Thank you, Lee. Calvin, you came in, and this was a very week of a lot of yes ands, exactly what everybody else said. So Calvin, you said, in addition to what others have shared, it's important to have transparency. Talk to me about that with your experience.
Well, I think what happens, especially, if you're one of the survivors, and May said this, and I think you and Leah had said this as well, is, what's next? Is it me? And to, in a leadership, in a leadership role, to really let people know, let the team know, what happened next, why we've made the cuts, and how we move forward, because it will help at least somewhat to put people at ease. I mean, I know that when it's happened to me a few years back, there's just some organizational shifts. So some, my boss got let go. I had expected to be let go, but I was retained. It's like, well, some of us are moving here, some of them are moving there, and really understanding what's going to happen next and why. And so that's, that helped to, put aside some concerns.
I think there's in your answer, you talked about, if they can give direction or, reasons of why the downsize happened. I think that's one of the biggest failures in a lot of these, whether it's a budget cut or a downsizing, is it's not like they change what their plan is, right? Steve, I'm thinking about the story about Krista's development team all getting COVID. It's like, oh, but you're still going to deliver everything. It's sort of like that with the downsizing. They're like, oh, we're reducing the force by 10%. We're cutting budgets across the board, yet we still expect you to deliver everything that was on the plan for 2023.
Yes, nothing seems hard to people who don't have to do it.
It's tough because, and maybe this is for our topic of the week in senior leadership, which we don't have, but it's like, when you're doing this, if you're downsizing, shouldn't you be downsizing your strategy, your plan, your initiatives, what you're doing to make sure that, and then if we can clearly do that, hey, we've done this reduction in force. The reason we're doing it is that we've decided to pull out of this market because we've realized we haven't had traction in this market. Therefore, most of the people impacted, and then it even ties to who gets downsized and where do you cut budget from, because you're doing it based on a product or a market or a whatever it may be. And I don't know. It seems like it could be done so much better than it's done. And I don't know. Calvin, that it really resonated with me when you talked about those reasons and what we could be doing with that. Paul, it takes an engineer to come in with the human element, doesn't it?
And that's really just echoing what May and a lot of others were saying, that there's a tendency to look at the business aspects of it, but it's still a room full of people that have their own emotional, and whether they're rational or not, personal elements that tie into the consequences. And it's usually not, how am I going to deal with lower resources? It's not the first thing on their head, or, oh my gosh, what about my KPIs? They're running around and coming up with new words to fill every acronym because they're a little bit hacked off at everyone.
Yeah.
My one boss actually did pretty well at this. The overall organization failed miserably, but I'll give him credit that he got everyone into a room and then just said, hey guys, what's the rumor mill, and what are your questions? I'll try to address those. They just tried to run out in front of it and deal with all the things that he knew people were going to be doing and saying. It just turns out that everything he said in that meeting turned out to be false anyway, but it was at least the right process. Did
he know it was false when he said it?
I think he had to at least have some inkling of an idea.
I mean, that to me would be a big, if he's getting fed false stuff from corporate and HR and stuff, that's one thing. If he's feeding the false stuff, that's a different, that goes back to the toxic company, toxic boss conversation we had. Yeah. But I think the human element is key. Steve, I'd love to get you've been sitting here quietly. I'd love to get your take on this from what we've seen, what you experienced over the past, decades.
Well, I'm finding a weird parallel here to air travel. I don't care if the plane is going to be late, if you'll let me know. Right. I had a case many years ago. This is a quick one. I was flying to Boston. Weather was horrible. And I went up to the gate agent and said, are you going to cancel this flight? And she whispered, probably. Don't tell anybody. So I hopped in my car and I started driving to Boston. And 4 hours into an 8-hour drive, I got an alert from my phone saying you've been rebooked on a flight for tomorrow afternoon. And happily, I was on my way to Boston. All was well. But the real point was, I just like to stay informed, and in some of the examples here, it's like, we're going to lay off 6% of the company, but that's it. There's not another shoe to drop, right? Or in Paul's example of sitting down with leadership and having leadership say, hey, let me show you the numbers. Revenue isn't where we thought it would be. We're in, say, the mortgage business, and suddenly nobody can afford a mortgage. So, it's going to materially impact our business going forward, and we're making some hard decisions. But being transparent in like every factor of life is, including, one more little rant at then. My wife goes insane if a person is coming by to do work on the house and they don't show up. She's perfectly fine if they send her a text. I'm going to be 3 hours late. Cool. So she's not like, if you're not here by 9:01, don't bother to come. Right. I mean, and I'm the same way. Just keep me informed. And I think that's the big thing when we're going through any sort of difficult time, keeping people informed, and then, adjusting as well our expectations, right? I mean, if we've got half the staff, we're going to do half the work.
Yeah.
So transparency is key.
Two things there. Wow. Transparency and being able to communicate and know what's going on. That should be a standard, right? Having respect for other people. But the other one was, I don't know, 4 hours into your drive to Boston, you're probably either stuck in traffic in New York City or in the middle of nowhere, Poconos or upstate New York. I don't know if you'd be happier, but I guess getting there is better than not getting there. Yeah.
The key was that there were 35 people waiting for me to present to them at 9:00 tomorrow. And I really wanted to have them have a good experience. Me showing up 3 to 6 to 8 hours after class begins would have been bad.
It would have been bad. I appreciate that. And I get it totally. Eva, one of the things that stuck out to me in your answer was the conversation on one-on-ones, right? It's such an important, we so often we see the group things, right? We're all brought into a room and we're told what happened. I mean, maybe I've been in a situation where one group of people went to one room, one group of people went to the other room. And it was like you were on like a game show where it's like, okay, step forward, front line, you're gone, which I guess is even at least a little better than turning your email off at 3 a.m. But Eva, you brought up this, the one-on-one, and I think that's an incredibly important thing, especially for product leaders to be thinking about, is it's not just how you handle your team and your organization, it's how you handle each individual person. Talk to me about the one-on-ones and the transparency there.
I think a good word, and I didn't include this in my post, was when managers become vulnerable with their direct reports, that gives you more insight into what's going into the organization, but then at least makes you realize that they care more about you as a human being than just, what work is getting done day to day. So I think in one-on-ones, being transparent and vulnerable to your direct reports as far as what's going on in the organization is definitely key for a number of reasons. I mean, I feel like it's kind of self-explanatory, but and then you can kind of get into those more darker doom and gloom areas because you are in a one-on-one. You can be a little bit more forthright than in a team meeting where, you have to exude positivity at times. So I think that that's kind of what I was getting at there.
No, I completely and totally get it. And I think that for product leaders, that's got to be very important because, as Leah said earlier, product management often is taking a lot of brunt of what's happening, whether it's reprioritizing or doing more with less or the same with less. I think for product leaders, having those candid heart-to-heart conversations, the vulnerability is such a key word. Thank you, Brene Brown, for making it a popular word these days. But as we deal with it, we have to handle those one-on-one situations. Cory Bryan, I feel like every week you're trying to channel your inner joy and come up with less words in an answer.
I'm failing.
You're down to a set, 2 sentences, but in average word, only like 5 words in a sentence. I mean, you're doing pretty good.
Well, and again, there's so many other good answers in there, but my gut reaction is next play. What do we do next? Now what? Okay, half the staff got let go. Now what? We can sit there and cry about it, or cry for a week or a day or a month or a year, or we never get over it, or we can see what we need to do next. And that would be my approach, is what can we do next? And I think the thing that a lot of people, have said, but is really key, is you're going to do less. Whatever it is, it's going to be less than you expect. And that's my poll answer was, you have to replan. And I really like the discussion that you kickstarted on Twitter, Grant, and Sahid's answer was very similar to that, which is reassess the objectives and agree on the needed changes and then realign and focus on those. Because you're going to do less. You have to focus on less things or less areas or less markets or less, features or whatever you want to call it. There's less because you have less people now.
Yep.
And I think that needs to be like super broadcast. If we've cut our staff in half and yet sales is still calling and saying, I need these features. I need you to go on the sales call. I need you to do this marketing piece. I mean, their other teams still have the same appetite they had before, and being able to be really clear across the organization of it's going to be less. We have fewer people. We're going to have therefore fewer features and fewer Marcom pieces and fewer of everything.
The remaining people should not work a equal amount of hours as 5 people can't work the amount of hours that 10 people worked. You can't.
Right. No.
I think the most troubling sign is when you hear we'll just have to do more with less. If you ever hear that, just get out.
And you're like, we're already doing more with less. Right? As a product manager, I'm supporting 4 teams now instead of just the 2 or 1 that I should be. And now you're saying you want me to support 6. I mean, it was kind of, I did a re-engineering project years ago, and the objective was, can we cut back our support staff? And we ran the numbers and said, we need to hire some more support staff because we had cut into the bone, right? And looking at, it's apparent. We had this riff of customer support, and within 15 days, our net promoter score had dropped significantly. Why? Because people were on the phone longer and, right? And it was just so shocking to the CFO, who was hoping to find cost savings in customer support. And I went, dude, you already found it.
And I will say I was at a company, and our chairman was really good. We were bloated at one point, and he brought in a CEO who was a cut to the bone type of guy. But once we got to the bone, he realized it and brought in somebody to rebuild the strategy from that. Right. So sometimes good leadership is going to be so critical with this. Dom, I'd love to get your take on this. How do you keep product management on course?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'd like to just go back to a comment that Leah made early on, was many hats, right? And then, yes, we do more with less. Cory was saying early on. We are, as product managers, we are experts in prioritization, right? So I'm very optimistic always, and it's an opportunity to showcase, how good we are at prioritization, right? So making sure that we are working on the right things. But to Leah's point, it's helping the team connecting the dots, right? Because suddenly there's a lot of finger pointing, I guess, right? It says, oh yeah, it's on you, it's on you, it's on you. When, we can find areas and help the team, maybe offload some of those activities with others, and making sure that nobody is dropping the ball in other functions, and all comes back to product management. So clarifying roles and responsibilities in those times is absolutely critical, I think. I mean,
completely and totally. And in a situation where it's both a reduction in force and a budget cut, it's tough. But I've seen sometimes where a reduction in force can be, mellowed out by using 1099s, having contractors, and that's where the budget would come in. But if you lose both of them, I think it's a tough place to go. Mm-hmm. So that's roles and responsibility, clarity of roles, clarity of prioritization. Dom, great. I completely and totally agree. Joy.
Yeah, so cutting people off at the last minute, like Grant, you said, this team in this room is gone and this team gets to stay. That's just bad management. That's That's just bad strategy. It's just a bad company. And if you want to keep your product management on track, or any one of your departments, you should, a year in advance. And what you want to do is start right then. You want to help your teams. You want to offer them, here's a department in HR that's going to be your mentor. Here's a department that's going to help you with your resume, with your LinkedIn. When we lay people off, we are going to continue with your benefits for 3 months. We will pay for classes. And that tells the people that the company cares. And so when people do get cut, there's not going to be the gossiping and the freak out and the checkouts. I mean, they're going to understand that this was strategic. It was well thought out. It was cared for. And there's a plan in place. And we're not going to just suddenly cut people on a Friday at 5 and then expect the rest of the team to pick up the
forward.
Right.
I don't think I've ever worked in a company like that.
Well, I mean, that should be the way, Steve. It just should work that way.
I'm with you. I'm just, it almost seems to me like it's accidents of management where I work, Oh, we just realized at 3 in the morning when I woke up in a panic, I realized we need to cut our staff by 10%. And then we come to the office and say, make it so, HR. And they're like, oh, well, that's one of the 3 things we do, fire people.
It should never happen. And, in that case, if it's management that says, oh, we need to cut, then you know what? Management has to roll up their sleeves and pick up the slack, because it is not fair to the remaining people to pick up that person's or people's work.
I was in a senior leadership team meeting where we were being told by corporate, so we were a division of a really, 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 really big conglomerate. You can guess who it was. And we were told that we had to cut 10% of cost because we had hit a specific EBITDA or operating income number. And everybody at the table started talking about, okay, let's talk about how many frontline people we're going to cut. And I looked around the table and there was a lot of redundancy. In at least 3 departments, there was at least 1 layer of redundancy. And I said, maybe we need to look in this room first, right? One of us is 2 or 3 frontline people in cost.
Yes.
My frontline people are already bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. Of course, I got my riff the next day, but actually, I negotiated it with my manager. It was time for me to leave, but nobody else left. And my manager, the senior vice president, said this was exactly the right thing to do. And he even said, I am the redundant one. I said, I know, but I'm ready to go. But they don't have that conversation.
You're ready to go.
Yeah, I was ready to go. They handled it. But I've also been in a place where, to your point, there was you get for a month for every year you've been here or something, 2 weeks for every year you've been here. And there was a formula, and it didn't help if you knew it was coming, but you knew you would be taken care of. You knew that your severance, you could plan for it. You knew what it was. It took a little of that fear and uncertainty off the table. Richard, you have been so patient waiting to share, and what's your take on this? How do we keep it on course? We're having a hard time hearing you.
No, he's got the feedback again too.
All right, I will see if Richard comes back. Any last thoughts on this, Steve? Outside of every company should be humane.
No, I think that's a good way to end this section. Every company should be humane.
Treat their people like the assets they are. They are key resources, and I can't remember. There's multiple.
No, treat them like humans.
People.
Treat them like friends. I mean, not like assets or human resources.
I was looking at asset as a it's a good thing. You're an asset to the company,
Yeah, I
not
understand.
like as a commodity asset.
Yeah.
And Grant, if I may add, it might be also important for the brand, right? If you don't take care or you're respectful of how you do things, it may affect your brand? I mean, I don't know. I see all these tech companies, they hire like crazy and then they're laying off like crazy. And, you know, my son is a tech guy, right? And it's like, I don't want to work for those companies, right?
Yeah.
What does this say, right? To the brand?
No, to the brand, both for as an employer of you know, choice, but also to the brand, seeing how people do this, it impacts how they think about Twitter or Facebook or whomever. Steve, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, you know, it actually, Dom's point made me think of a similar thing with non-compete clauses. I've encountered many companies recently who are like, oh no, we don't have a non-compete clause. And I'm surprised that people still do have them. But the message from this company I was talking to, they said, well, we want people to work here because they want to work here, not because they have a non-compete clause. And after all, we hired you for your experience that you acquired prior to becoming part of our company. So, you know, non-compete clauses, first of all, are pretty much unenforceable. But secondly, it's a little bit insulting to everybody. I mean, the ideal scenario is if you decide to leave us, and we hope you won't, but if you do, you'll speak kindly about us. Instead of, I can't, you know, you forced me to sign this non-compete clause and blah, 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 blah. Now I'm leaving in anger and I'm going to say bad things about you from now on.
No, I completely and totally agree. I saw a Richard Branson quote. There was something, invest in your employees to get to the point where they can leave and treat them so well that they don't want to leave.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's brilliant.
I think that's a good one. Richard, you're back. Any
I'm
thoughts?
back. So I went through this 3 times. The first time we went through this, it turned out they were selling the company and they got rid of the entire product department. So I was gone. Right. So who cares? The second time this happened and they laid off 20% of the workforce. Yeah. The question me and a couple of people had at that meeting where they were talking about it is, what's the 6-month strategy? What's the 2-year strategy and the 5-year strategy for us to recover? And when the leaders stumbled at that question, a lot of us left because we knew that they didn't have a plan. This was just haphazard, right? We're just trying to make the numbers look good. And the last time this happened back in October, they got rid of the redundancy, which happened to have been a lot of the middle management that had, you know, a strong team set up behind them.
Yep. As a manager, that's actually, I went into a company and hired a great team of directors. I was a VP. And then when the 2008, 2009 crunch hit, I was the redundancy because I had hired a good team. And sometimes that happens, right?
Yeah. That's why had been looking for work.
Yeah. So, wow. Great conversation on this. Let's move to our poll from Wednesday. The poll question, what is the hardest impact of downsizing, budget cuts to overcome? The options were the lost knowledge from people who were lost, the morale issues moving forward, more work for less with less resources, the ability to be in the market discovering gets reduced, or other it depends, share and comment. Cory, I'm going to start with you. You were one of the 8% of people who voted for more work for less resources.
Yeah, same thing, right? Because you're losing your focus, or your focus is going to shift because you have less people to do things and you have to change the work that you're doing. Now, your vision, your product vision may not change, your product strategy may not change, but the way you go about approaching those now with less has to change.
No, I get that. Obviously, each of these are things I came up with in my mind when thinking of the question. I was leaning towards that one, but you voted for it, so I decided to vote for another one.
Plus, as soon as you said less resources, I thought, well, maybe we have less pencils, because pencils are a resource.
Yes, exactly. And we can't draw enough. We can't draw as much as we need to because we
right.
don't have the pencils or a pencil sharpener or erasers.
Could be.
Yeah, it could be that. Now, Dom, you were one of the 13% who said other it depends.
Only the above.
That's why it says hardest, Dom, hardest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the hardest one, if really I had to choose, because I mean everything resonated with me there, but I think, it's this morale, right? Where you're insecure, you're uncertain on what's next, and obviously the morale is contagious, right? So you lose complete productivity. I mean, it's just a snowball effect. So if I really had to choose one, it would be the morale, right?
In morale at 43% has the most votes. Ability to be in the market, 4% was the least. Lost knowledge at 30% was second. May, where did you vote?
Morale.
Morale? Okay, you must be one of those +4 on here because you voted early.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I voted for morale just because I feel like the lost knowledge eventually gets replaced over time because, as people as people have to learn about the lost knowledge, it takes time, but a lot of that is just, how are you feeling, right? We're talking about how do we rebuild product management, or it's not rebuild, but like, how do we recover from such a loss? And it's, the leadership needs morale too. So as people who are, trying to steer the ship in a direction and everyone's like running off with all your lifeboats, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, no, I completely and totally get that. Joy, based on the fact that the McCaffrey metric is team morale, I have to assume that you voted for team morale here.
That was my first inclination to vote for morale. However, the more I thought about it, that's true for any team, any department. But if we're talking about product management, I actually just voted. I voted late while we were talking.
Okay.
The lost knowledge. And yes, May, it's true that there is a lot of knowledge that you can gain after a couple of months. But I've also worked at companies that are so complex and there is so much history that there's that one person who says, we did this because so-and-so tried this and they knew so-and-so, and then, this happened. And so then it's just, that is just not documented anywhere, obviously. And that is lost forever. I guess it depends on the situation, but there is some lost knowledge that is never going to be.
The skeletons in the closet, the institutional knowledge of how things work and how to get things done. And that's why I actually voted for it. It was this part of it's the market knowledge. And there's market knowledge that is hard to replace because it's built over so long. It takes a long time for it to build up some of that intuition and stuff. But I think Joy, you made the case better than I would have, where it's also that internal institutional knowledge of why did we make certain decisions, why did we do certain things, and
then
here's the thing,
all over again.
Yeah, we make the same mistakes, and I've been there when that's happened. So thank you for making a better case for the lost knowledge than I would have. Calvin, you also voted for morale. Anything to add to what May had said?
The only thing that I'd add is what I mentioned in the comments, was that in the short term, morale becomes an issue, but in the long term, it's lost knowledge. And I'd echo what Joy said, that sometimes the knowledge just walks out the door and you just can't recapture that.
Yeah. So, but you voted for morale, but you understand you could see the knowledge as well.
I can. Well, I'll just kind of recap what I wrote. In the short term, it's morale, and in the long term, you lose that lack of knowledge.
Yeah, and I did love that sort of lens of short term versus long term.
Yeah.
I guess the key for the morale goes back to our toxic companies, toxic bosses conversation. There are some places where the toxicity, if they handled it wrong, lasts longer than the mid to long term of the knowledge of people who still may be, gun shy 10 years after a CEO has left. And I think that was an example Richard had used. Richard, how did you vote?
I voted for other.
Okay.
And that's because it's a cycle, and you're going to go through periods where each one of those is the biggest issue you're dealing with. Usually it starts with morale, followed by more work. Then they find out the lost knowledge, and then, you lose your ability for market discovery, and then you start to recover from it all.
Yeah.
The morale is going to start to come back as people become numb to it all. People are going to pick up the slack. People are going to learn what they didn't know, and they're going to find a way to do the discovery.
Boy, Richard, the way you described that, I wish that's how my head was thinking when it came up with these answers, that it was sort of like a life cycle, right? You go through each of the stages, but that's so well put, better than I. Eva, had you voted?
Yeah, I voted for morale because honestly, I think product leaders have a really hard decision or a hard way for making the team, I don't know, to put them in a positive headspace. Because as an employee, are you thinking, crap, like if I work like my ass off, is this going to end up being my resulting factor? I'm just going to get laid off. Or do I just, do the whole quiet quitting thing and see what happens? Like, I feel like as a product leader, and I am not a product leader, those guys have a very hard job to do.
Those people.
Yes, those people have a very hard job to do. But I think, yeah, I don't know how you would keep morale up on a team to kind of go forward on there.
It can be tough. And I think, the vulnerability, as you talked about in the first answer, is going to be key there. Make sure you can do that. And it's tough, having been somebody as a leader who's gone through it. The toughest is if there's there's another foot to drop and you can't say anything. And that's where, it tears at you, and it becomes a morale issue for yourself, as you said, for the product leaders. Leah, how did you vote, or did you vote?
I did, morale. And I looked at this at a higher level because all these other choices, you have like some C-suite executives and maybe their shareholders made this decision for their company and it did not involve you, and it doesn't really matter. It's like, I have less resources. Oh, well, I can't develop all these cool products that are going to make them a bunch of money. It's not my problem. Technically, it's their problem, and they put this upon themselves. So it's like, some of those things, it's like, it sucks for me, but also it's like, whatever, I didn't make this choice. The morale issue bleeds into the community and in people's personal lives, and it just everywhere. And people commit suicide over this. People are depressed. It's a horrific thing that happens that impacts everyone's personal lives deeply, and impacts the teams deeply. So whether you're talking about the company or in your personal life, I think the morale issues are so, they have the hardest impact in general for our country and for just humanity. I hate it. All these other things, it's like, whatever, it's their choice.
You put it that way, and I'm changing my voice. I think in my head, I was very much thinking closed off for a product leader. But if you think of the extended impact of it on relationships in society and everything else, gosh, there's only one answer. Boy, Leah, thank you so much for bringing that.
Brent, sorry, Brent, just want to add something about morale and why it's so important. And I'm pretty proud of what my company is doing right now. Is we are setting up a committee to address morale. So we are 5 people right now going to meet and see how we can increase morale within the organization in different areas of the business. It's been recognized and we're actually acting on it. So, just to reinforce, the morale point of view in the company.
No, it's so important. Again, the McCaffrey metric is always going to be one of the best, my favorite ones. Paul, any thoughts? I mean, I don't know how you follow Leah, but.
No, and it's funny because someone had mentioned about the long-term doing the training and some of the job assistance stuff. I was actually with a company that did that. They decided to shut down their entire office in one of their 3 cities that they were based in. And so my office was one that was getting shut down, and they offered this 6 or 9 month period with training, and they would offer money on the back end of it if you stayed the whole time. And as someone who likes to grow things, the idea of I'm going to be here for 6 months watching the slow degradation of everything I built was heartbreaking to me. And I took the first job offer that I got, which was maybe questionable in its own right, but I would have been just destroyed to be there for that time. I've also been there for the hey, there's a organizational meeting, might want to grab a box on your way, kind of setup where it's whether it was on purpose or it was just sudden, either way, the same effect occurred. And then I tried to think about, okay, well, what would a very, I think it was you, Grant, that mentioned like, hey, we're getting back to our core. We have these things that aren't our main part of our business, and we really need to just contract a little bit in order to have the right business. I thought about what that would look like, and it would still be, even you don't have all of the same issues about, oh, I don't understand what's going on in the organization kind of stuff. But the only thing that's left is, well, I like those people, or at least they're people. So no matter what direction I came at it from, the morale of it just kept coming up over and over and over again. And I'll be the first to say my lost knowledge never hurt a single company in the long run. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I'd like to see them get along without me. And then they did.
No, that's fair. In companies handling it better, it's, you know, sort of back to the way that we were talking. May was talking about it should be handled, with at least the one situation with you. Steve, did you vote?
I did not, but I would have voted for lost knowledge,
Okay.
despite whatever Paul just said.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of the service repair guy that got laid off, and a week later, the machine broke, the assembly line was down, they were losing $20,000 an hour. Nobody could fix it. Finally, they called this guy they laid off and said, dude, can you come fix this? And he came in, listened to it for about 15, 20 minutes, and then made a fix. And sure enough, the machine's running again. They said, oh, hallelujah. You send us a bill for any amount you want, we'll pay it. So we sent him a $5,000 bill, and accounting got involved and said, could you please itemize? And he said, okay. Hitting the machine with a hammer, $50. Knowing where to hit the machine with a hammer, $49.50.
Exactly. I knew that story was coming as soon as you started telling it, but it's true, right? There's that type of institutional knowledge, and I think that's why I originally voted for it. But I can see morale. I can see all of them. Obviously, I put them there. We've had an amazing conversation. I do want to touch on one question before we get the lightning round. As a product leader, when you learn about pending cuts, assuming you're learning about it in advance, not being told like when they tell your employee, your team, what should your first actions be? How can you prepare, right? If you're being told, hey, let me frame the situation. They're actually giving you a chance to have impact on what may have some input. What would the first actions be? Cory.
Ask why. Why are we doing this? I mean, because if I understand the reason why we're doing this,
Yeah.
I can help plan out a better outcome.
I love that.
Scattering.
Yeah, I love that. And it goes back to the conversation we started in the first question with, if you can explain why you're doing it, right, what the rationale is, it should impact how you make decisions with it. I love that that answer. May.
But once you know why, you can start thinking about the outcomes in terms of what does this mean, right? So how do you trim back the work that you're asking people to do afterwards, so people can have time to digest, recover? I presume all the other stuff is being taken care of by the corporation. You don't have any control over like what their severance looks like, what their other stuff looks like. So in terms of like, well, we can't do more with less, so we got to do less. So what is less? So tell people that you are acknowledging that we have fewer people to work with, and there's also going to be setbacks. So like, let's have a plan. Tell people what it is when the time comes.
Cory, May, nice start. Calvin.
So I'd go back to what Cory said, and not only why, but starting to assess, if the why is is consistent with the direction that I'd want to take my career in, and it may be that I start looking elsewhere, start working, working on my resume and reaching out to my contacts.
Completely and totally. I mean, you need, especially if it's a strategy change or something else that you might not agree with.
Yeah.
You need to be thinking about that. Awesome. Dom.
Yeah, I was actually leaning toward that is, if you don't need me, all right, well, let me look somewhere else.
Yeah. So,
Right.
so the first step might be making that it's not the why, and maybe the interim step before May is putting the plan together to do it, is making the decision yourself of, is this what you want to sign, what you signed up for and what you want to be?
I don't know if I agree with that though, because at the end of the day, as a product leader, I mean, you probably still feel a little bit attached to your team. You're not going to be able to jump ship before the cuts happen, most likely.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I would feel a responsibility towards my team and try to protect them as much as I can, even if I am jumping ship as well.
In my situation, what I mentioned earlier, I volunteered myself to be, because I was part of it was to protect my team. Right. So it may be, if you look at this and say, all of a sudden, as Richard talked about, as their company, if I'm going to be redundant, right, maybe I need to be the one to step up and say, there's redundancy here. I've built a team that's good. I can see both sides of it. It's probably going to be situational where it goes. Any other thoughts before we move on to the lightning round?
I'm just going to pile on to that. But when you volunteer, you also leave yourself the option to negotiate your package.
Yeah.
And right, like I had been there for 3 years. I negotiated 19 weeks severance, and I had 11 weeks PTO that I got paid out. Right?
Giving him plenty of time to be in our community. Thank you, Richard.
Yep.
It's one thing that kind of jumped in my head when I wore the sales hat. Everyone always said, never give something up without getting something in return. And it's kind of the same thing when they say, oh, I want to pay 10% less in people. Great. Here's the consequences of that. Here's what you get in return is X project doesn't get done. These functions don't occur, whatever it happens to be, but make it instead of that whole do more with less, let them know, no, real world, here's what's going to happen. And that way it's not, well, number one, they might say, well, let's find someone easier to go cut stuff from and leave your team alone. Or they say, this guy's not really good at doing this game and get rid of you. But either way, we would expect that of our outside sales team. Why would it not be the same inside to say, you don't just give up without getting something back, a consequence?
No, I think that's the hard discussion we should be having before they make the decision, right? Help them understand what the trade-offs are if they're going to make these decisions. What a great conversation. It's time for us to get to our lightning round. We got a large group, so we're going to try to be expedient. What words, which that means is lightning round, a phrase, a word. What words or word of wisdom would you share with a new product leader, so hasn't been through this before, who is dealing with headcount and budget cuts? And I'm going to start with Richard.
I'm going to say duck, and then remember there's always something better on the horizon.
Duck, and there's something better on the horizon. Okay, I love it, Richard. Calvin.
To clarity and transparency.
Clarity and transparency. Love that. Paul.
Just morality. You're going to have to live with yourself after this.
Morality. Awesome. Joy.
With Richard, my first instinct was leave.
Or duck.
Get out. Run.
Yeah. Leah.
Yeah, this is probably a traumatic response. Yeah, get that resume right.
Okay, work on the resume. Cory.
Think hard.
Think hard. All right. Eva.
Don't play favorites with your team.
Don't play favorites. I love that, because you need to make sure you're doing the right decisions with where you want to go. Who are the right people you need? I love that. Dom.
Be vulnerable and authentic.
Be vulnerable and authentic. That's wow, powerful. May.
I don't know. I really don't know. Just like take care of yourself.
Can I say something? I think I don't know is actually a good answer. Realize you don't know. You don't have the right answers, but I love to take care of yourself. I think that's going to be so important. Steve.
Be honest.
Be honest.
Be honest. I mean, if I'm communicating to employees, be as honest as I can be. It's kind of like the breakup, it's not you, it's me. Your work is fine. This is where we're going. I just think you have to be as honest with them as you can be. And it also helps your own sense of morality.
I love that. For me, I would be saying, first thing is take a step back, right? Take a breath, take a step back, think, think hard, as Cory said it, but think about what's going on and what this means. And then sort of put a plan in place. You have to be honest, but I also think you have to be an advocate for your people. When I've had to do this, I also needed to be an advocate for them, right? Because some of them are going to make it through and some of them aren't, but I can be an advocate for all of them. And I've had the conversation multiple times where it's like, I know it doesn't feel this way, but at some point you're going to look back and say, I'm glad it happened when it did, because it got you into a better place. And every single time it has. And even for me, when I've gone through it. So I think take that step back and pause, but then be an advocate for them and be a supporter for them. So, unfortunately, this is the reality we're going through. We go through it seems like every 10 or so years when the economy does whatever it's doing and budgets get cut and staffs get reduced. But what I got out of this conversation is, if we are in that situation as a product leader, deal with it with humanity and vulnerability. Be a good person and make decisions that are right for your people and for the company, and move forward. Leah, you really got me on the whole, macro level of the morale, and I think that more and more we need to be thinking about that, because we are all a society together, and independent decisions, whether it's about a riff or brakes on a locomotive to prevent accidents, right? Each of these decisions we make have a sort of that ripple effect, the butterfly's wings causing the wind. And the conversation today was wonderful. What a great panel. Dom, May, Cory, Leah, Joy, Paul, Calvin, Richard, and my partner, Steve. Every week, we have amazing conversations that make me learn and think and grow. And I thank all of you for that and for being part of it. And we do it every week, right? On Monday, the question goes in the community. On Wednesday, we do the poll. And on Fridays, we have these amazingly impactful and vital calls. So thank you, everybody, for a wonderful call. We'll see you next week in the community. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you so much.